Hey everyone, today we are looking at Jeremiah chapter 50. It's a really long chapter. It's a chapter that deals with Jeremiah's prophecy concerning Babylon. This, as we've talked about the last couple weeks, falls in this section where Jeremiah is calling out the hypocrisy and idolatry and the injustice, not just in Israel and Judah, which is what the majority of the book is about, but actually the surrounding nations as well. And here we get this prophecy against Babylon and about Babylon's evil and its impending destruction. And you may be wondering, why is God rebuking Babylon? Doesn't earlier in the book and throughout Jeremiah, God says, I'm going to raise up Babylon and I'm going to use them to reprimand my people. That my people, the Israelites, the Jews, have rebelled against me. They've followed other gods. They've committed injustice. And now I'm going to use these other people, these Babylonians, to come in and bring my people into exile. This is stated all over the book of Jeremiah and in other places in the Old Testament, that God uses the Babylonians to do his bidding. In chapter 25 of Jeremiah, God even calls Nebuchadnezzar, who does who invades Judah and destroys the temple, his servant. That Nebuchadnezzar is God's servant who is going to do his will to carry his people into exile. But now here, God is sort of turning the tables and saying, because you oppressed my people and sent them into exile, I'm going to punish you. And so what's the deal here? What's going on? Is that fair? And I've always struggled to deal with passages like this. You may have noticed other ones. The most famous one is maybe where God hardens Pharaoh's hearts in the book of Exodus. So instead of allowing Pharaoh to release God's people from their slavery, it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart, which then kind of makes him even less inclined to let God's people go. And you may think, what is the deal with that? Well, an interesting way to look at this is actually from ancient Jewish commentary called the Talmud. And it talks about this story by telling a little allegory or parable. And the parable goes like this. It says, a king had a cheeky son who refused to even recognize him as his father. The king asked one of his ministers to take his son away into exile with him from the palace and correct him. This minister, who the king asked to do the job, did not like the king either and took advantage of his mission by getting revenge against the king on the son. So after a few years of captivity, the prince longed for his father and the palace, and he sent a message, and the king brought him back to the palace. When the king knew the punishments that his son had endured from this minister, the king tried the minister. The minister, defended himself by arguing he had only done his mission. I've only done what you've asked me to do. But the king punishes him with death for not correcting his son, but literally abusing his power. And that's kind of the story of what is happening in this passage, that God does raise up Babylon and commissions them to be sort of the judgment bringers on his rebellious people, Israel, that he wants to send them into exile as a way to correct them, to bring them back to him, to make them long for him as their God again. But we are told, not just here, but especially like in the book of Daniel, you can see stories about that, how King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, actually abused their mandate that God gave them to be a correction by actually abusing their power, by mistreating them, by harming them, throwing them to the lion's den or into the fiery furnace or whatnot, that they had actually gone above and beyond what God had called them to do. And so now they were facing God's wrath. It's not just as if God sort of changed his mind and said, oh, I'm going to use you. Oh, no, that I've used you. Now I've changed my mind and I'm going to punish you for doing what I asked you to do. No, they did, in a sense, what God asked them to do, but then they went above and beyond that by abusing the mission that God gave them to correct his people. And so now God turns and says, yeah, I called you, but you abused that power that I gave you. And I think a lesson in this for us is, one, God's word comes true. So Babylon does end up getting conquered by the Persian Empire from the north, just as Jeremiah 50 tells us. But secondly, that God, when God speaks to us, God corrects us and rebukes us, and we say, okay, I get the point, but then we sort of abuse that power. We abuse that forgiveness that God has extended us. Or God gives us a mission and a mandate, and we go above and beyond what that mandate is, what that mission is, to do our own thing, to carry out our will and our purposes, then, well, that's going beyond what God has called us to do. And there's accountability to be had for that. And so we ought to be very cognizant of what it is that God has called us to do, the forgiveness that he's extended, the ministry opportunities that he's presented us with, and say, all right, God, you've put this in front of me. I'm going to be faithful to you for this. Not that, God, you've given me this opportunity and I'm going to do what I want with it. Or, God, you've extended me this forgiveness and now I'm going to keep doing the things that I've always wanted to do. But actually to be faithful with whatever God has extended to us, and to do it all for him, as Paul says in Colossians chapter 3. So that is our devotional today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.